Hi, it's Jeff Chalmers here from discoverdouble.bass.com, which is the home of online learning for double bass players with our lessons, our interviews, our courses, our masterclasses, and we are fortunate to feature some of the world's best educators. The gentleman that is with us today has been a member of the LA Phil bass section for, I think he's celebrating his 25th year. He's also an associate professor at USC Thornton, a celebrated author, particularly known for his work Fractal Fingering, and we are very fortunate to have him as a faculty member over at Discover Double Bass. So let's welcome David Allen Moore. David, fantastic to see you today.
Great to see you again, Jeff. It's been far too long since the last time.
It feels like a lot has happened since you joined us.
Just one or two things.
Yeah, so you were last here in 2018.
Yeah.
And we're now in 2024, and wow, yeah, it does feel pretty intense. But it's been a real privilege to see you again and to hear you teach this week. And we've been revisiting your German bow course and adding in lessons. And I was hoping I could maybe ask you a few questions that are geared towards the beginner student starting out with German bow. When you started out with German bow, who was your first teacher? Where did you kind of pick up the German bow from? Which school did you? Yeah, was
well, you know, in general, I think the suggestion is kind of people always ask what bow to use, and frankly, it's the bow of the teacher that you're working with. Because I started on French bow because I think a lot of beginners, because of other strings, they're just sort of handed French bows when you start, and it's like, okay, it's like the other bows. I guess I'll do that. But I was sort of a late bloomer. I started as a jazz player. And so when I got to college and I started studying with former LA Phil principal Dennis Tremblay, he was a German bow player. And as excellent a teacher and player as he might have been, translating was not his forte, and I was not at a skill level where that was something I could do. And I could be rewriting history, but my memory at the time was something that I just decided as like, I can't figure this out anymore. And I came into a lesson, it's like, I'm switching, and he's like, oh, okay, I guess so. And then everything kind of took off from there because I felt like I was getting more direct instruction with German bow.
Yeah, and what are the advantages or the differences for somebody at home who's maybe considering switching to German bow or unsure about which path they should be taking? Because like you, my first teacher introduced me to German bow, Georgi Sinsiewski, and I studied with Jerzy Hudek and Roberto Carrillo Garcia, and they were all German bow players, and so I had a wealth of German bow. But had they played French bow, I suspect I'd be playing overhand.
I would suspect that too.
Yeah, but in terms of your experience now, being proficient on both overhand and underhand bow, what do you think are the kind of the pros and cons of one path to the other?
Well, aside from the direct instruction from the teacher, if you're just kind of looking at a general standpoint, I feel like German bow is a little bit easier for beginners just because the basic cradle of the bow allows the hand to be fully relaxed. So as you're holding the bow in your hand, it just sits in that shape and you don't have to really do anything to keep it off the floor. With French bow, that shape happens upside down. Like this is where French bow feels secure. And then when you're coming around, that's something where you have to manage keeping tension out of the thumb.
So when you're relaxed, the German bow is falling into your hand, and when you relax too much, if you're playing overhand, it falls to the floor.
Well, the sort of, if you deconstruct a bow hold to like its basic components, it's one thing on one side and one thing on the other side. So in German bow, I have one thing on the bottom, and my thumb is over the top, and so the stick rests between those two things, and I'm already in playing position. With French bow, in order to do that, you have to be in this position. Okay. So I have one thing on top, my thumb, and one thing on the bottom, my index finger. And so to get that into playing position, I have to turn it over. And so the idea of kind of consciously releasing the thumb comes into play because you do have to hold it to keep from dropping on the ground. But I can give you a little tidbit for the French bow players as to kind of how to deal with that.
Please.
Because it may be a challenging thought is like, how do you deal with that if, how do you relax your thumb and not drop the bow? But a very simple trick that you can do is if you have the bow on the string, and honestly, I would start a little bit further out towards the balance point so that you don't feel like you have to hold the bow up as much. If you put your pinky behind the frog.
Behind the frog,
yeah. So this is a normal bow hold. Putting my pinky behind the frog, now I can take my thumb off the bow.
Wow.
So you can alternate between playing in a normal fashion and then switching to see what that might feel like to play with a relaxed thumb, so that when you go back onto the bow, you try and keep it as kind of supple and gentle as possible so that you're not clutching the bow with your thumb.
I love that, David. I've never tried that. And when I do try that later, I'm going to make sure there's a carpet underneath,
Yeah,
and not this
that's
lovely hard wooden
probably
floor.
wise.
Because it looks really
Well, you don't have to
crazy,
do what
but-
I mean, you don't have to do what I did in the sense of doing it on the fly. You can kind of go through a stroke, stop. Once your pinky's behind, it's not going anywhere because you have one thing on one side and one thing on the other side. Again, you have that basic idea. And then I'm not really trying to play loud. I don't have a lot of leverage at the tip, but I can still get a pretty solid sound like that, and then stop again, go back to the normal bow hold, and continue. But the true kind of magic of this is if you can go through and then kind of just change and see what that feels like, so you have the facility and the suppleness to be able to move your fingers around, so you're not kind of in claw mode, just clamping onto the bow and keeping everything in position.
That's incredible, because you're really experiencing the release of tension in real time and then trying to recreate that with your actual bow
No, exactly.
holding.
You're not just kind of listening to your teacher and trying to do your best
Yeah.
to not play with tension. You can really feel what that could feel like at a later stage in your development.
Very cool, David. I haven't experienced that concept before. And for those who are picking up the German bow, what's a basic grip that, you know, I mean, this is, sorry, I don't like the word grip, bow hold.
Yes.
We don't do
Cradle.
grips. Cradle is even better.
Yes.
So why would we call it a cradle and not a bow grip?
Well, I think because the idea of gripping immediately implies, like, if you're climbing up a rope, you're holding onto it and squeezing and using your thumb to hold onto it. And so the idea of having a gentle shape that cradles the bow and encompasses the bow, but I'm very, very light on the stick. I'm not holding onto it. I'm just balancing it, so that feeling with German bow, if we kind of back up a step, basic principle is these are tools or implements designed by human beings to be played by human beings. So if you are a human being, which I think pretty much 100% of your audience is, at least the comprehending audience, maybe cats and dogs watching but not getting so much information, you don't want to distort your body from its natural shape. So anything that looks altered from...
Because your natural hand shape, if you completely relax...
Yeah, just where you are. And so different people with different sized thumbs, there's going to be more overlap on the first finger or less. I'm just trying to find a position where I'm altering my hand as little as possible just to be able to cradle the bow. There's a kind of an old trope of how to think about holding the bow that I thought was foolproof until I met a young man in one of Caroline Emery's classes. But the idea was always to imagine you're holding a little bird. You know, so it's like you have to be containing it so it doesn't fly away, but you want to be gentle so that it stays there. And I just remember asking in the class, you know, what would you do if you were holding a little bird in your hand? And he said, I'd kill it. I was like, okay, I have to come up with another analogy.
Wrong answer.
Yeah, but for most people, the idea of being kind of gentle and holding it in there. So if I pull the bow from here, it should come out very easily. It shouldn't be something where there's resistance there.
Yeah, and Caroline, that we reference, is a wonderful teacher. And
Yes.
She's a superb book called Bowworks, I
Yes,
believe.
yeah.
Would you recommend that to somebody, any just on and off, you know, tangent
Oh,
here?
absolutely.
Any kind
It's-
of books, recommendations for beginner German bow students?
I
or-
mean, that's more just a general bowing book. It doesn't give you a lot of bow hold specific type stuff. It's more about shapes and open strings and rhythms, but all of her early bassist literature is outstanding.
That's great. And then in terms of like what part of with your thumb, and maybe you could describe the digits just briefly. I know
Sure.
this is a huge topic, which is why we filmed a huge course all around German bow usage. But how would you describe it to someone who's just picking it up for the first time in terms of?
I really want to feel, in order to feel that cradle, I want to feel the weight of the bow. If I'm squeezing the bow, I can feel like I have this hard object in my hand, but I can't feel the weight of this part of the bow. So I'm trying to find a point where the weight is resting on the second finger, and that's what's really holding the bow up in this direction.
Okay, so that's
Right,
the
so you
second. It's the second finger. Yeah?
Yes.
Right.
So that's actually not a bad way to experience that. If you're holding the bow out in front of the bass, and you kind of move your second finger around to direct the tip in this direction. And then you have your pinky under the metal part here, the ferrule, so that you have control over the bow in this direction. And then a lot of people will kind of bend the thumb and put the thumb on top of the stick and kind of activate like that. This may be a more advanced topic, but I think it's great for a beginner to think of. I really am in contact with the stick with the side of my thumb as it lays there naturally. I'm trying to keep a more open shape rather than being twisted around like that. And so that way, it kind of short circuits the natural tendency to want to grip or grab, because it's just a surface that's contacting the bow. I'm not using my thumb.
You're not pressing in with the pad.
And so when I'm making that sort of bowing gesture of this kind of circular gesture, it's more that I'm feeling the stick push up against my thumb than I'm pushing down on that part of the stick.
It feels like the elbow is a really key part of this, and in terms of like the leverage that you are, and or the movement. I don't know if leverage is the right word, I'm not sure.
Well, it is. I mean, it is leverage. You're dealing with levers. I mean, what I try to think about, that's not a bad little exercise to do as well. When you have the bow resting on the string, to just kind of see if you can keep that free as well, because there's a tendency to kind of want to lock all that stuff down. But what I think about for beginners is it's really important that you have a connection with your engine, meaning like the thing that's getting the bow to move. And even though you're holding in your hand and your arm is moving, that engine is really your core or center of gravity. So you can kind of edit out all the other details. And if you're holding the bow in a nice relaxed bow hold, not a bow grip, arm is relaxed, bow's on the string, you can move your body and get a pretty functional sound. It might not be perfectly refined or have all of the flexibility that you eventually want, but at least your engine is working, so that as you get more freedom and more awareness with it, you can start to add in those other elements and get more fluidity, but you're always going back to that feeling of connection. I think of the idea of kind of gear ratios, in that if my arm is kind of locked off, everything is 1-to-1. So if I move my center a little bit, then everything moves in any direction that exact same amount. And then as I get more fluid, I might move a little bit at my center, but I get more follow through in my extremities. But it's still based on the same movement. It's just at kind of assimilating more hinges and getting more flexibility and refinement.
Well, I think I remember hearing Lauren Pierce say that the study of the bow is the study of an instrument in itself. It's a real lifetime endeavour, and we would always encourage people to experience that alongside a teacher. It's certainly something, I'd say probably one of the most difficult things to self-learn, perhaps, in terms of, or complex parts of playing the bass if you were to attempt to do something. So I would encourage people to be using materials such as your fantastic course, but also getting some feedback hands-on from an experienced teacher.
No, absolutely. And I think one kind of tool that you can use in the early stages of this, or probably at any stage, I always find that when I re-examine my fundamentals with an open mind, I always make huge progress in every area of my playing, so it's not that this is just for beginners. But the way that the bow engages with the string is that there's a flexing of the stick and or the hair, and it's grabbing the string, and then that's pulling the string to the side, and then it's releasing and moving. And so in the early stages of playing, you can almost think about the screw as like a difficulty setting in a way, where if you have it fairly loose to the point where it's just not slack anymore, it's not actually tight to where you'd want to play it as maybe an advanced player, but it really allows that ribbon of hair to wrap around the string. And so even if you're not quite feeling the mechanics yet, or you have tension because you haven't figured out the efficiency, you'll still get the hair to grab the string and get that to function. And then as you'll find, or what I would imagine you would find as you get more accomplished with it, it's like, okay, now I'm bottoming out in the middle because I have more free weight, or I'm more relaxed, and then it's like, okay, I'm ready for level 2. And you just add a little bit to that, and then you can gradually put it to a point where it's supporting what you're bringing to the instrument.
And that feeling of the bite point is so important, to feel that you can move the string back and forth. It's a bit like plucking the string and then releasing it.
Yeah.
It's not just one action that happens. It's a process, and the friction with the string. Just to finish off then, David, I was thinking a really basic question somebody at home might be thinking is, how tight should the bow be?
I can give you some guidelines. It's a little challenging to say because it's sort of player to player and gear to gear.
Yeah.
But what we want to find is a point where the bend, this curve in the bow here, is the camber. And so we want to find the lowest point and make sure that we're not letting the wood touch the string, that there's enough support in there. And generally I'm kind of just pushing directly down on it. Clearly that's not enough tension for me because I can get it to go all the way down. So I'm going to add a little bit. I try to remember, or encourage people to remember, because I certainly remember, that the screw each turn doubles the tension. And so the more turns you have, the greater effect it's having. So by the time you're getting close to where you want to be, just that much might be enough. It doesn't have to be a thing where you're kind of constantly turning it. So I'm going to try and find that point where when I have maximum engagement, maximum weight, I'm maybe almost touching the hair, but not quite there, because that's going to give me...
the stick of the bow here is pressing into the hair, which is pressing against the... So that's now the stick of the wood. The wood is now touching the... Almost touching the hair, which is touching the string.
Right.
So that's the way that you can gauge.
Yeah.
That's a great concept, David. And I think for those who are looking to take a deep dive into German bow technique, I would highly recommend checking out your lessons and the course over at Discover Double Bass. You've done an amazing job.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm really grateful that you came back to revisit this topic, because it's so important to all of us. I mean, the bow is this wonderful tool that can really change the way that you play.
Our voice in this repertoire, for sure.
Yeah, and jazz bass players and classical bass players, I think it's a fantastic thing. So thank you so much for joining us, David, and thank you for watching at home. If you want to learn more from this master teacher, please go and check out all the links that we have below, and we will see you next time.